have other programs. I just visited a All Our Kin program in New Haven, started by an outstanding young woman named Jessica Sager, and they provide home care for pre-kindergarten kids whose mothers, typically single parent homes, work, and that is providing employment opportunities for some unemployed people, because these are being run out of people's homes. But almost more importantly to me is it's providing a well-functioning environment and a supportive environment for young people before they get into school, which has been shown statistically is a very important contributor to later school performance. So, no, I'm a huge supporter of preschool programs. I have a whole panoply of things in my plan, in my education plan, that will help. Those preschool programs are really make more of a difference in our inner cities, which is where we have our biggest educational challenges. But there's so many things we need to do. I mean, that's only a small piece of the puzzle. So I don't know why anybody would have said I don't support pre-K programs. And I think Dan Malloy's trying to say that he started pre-K programs in Stanford, so he's trying to make it a contrast with me. But I support pre-K programs. Who wouldn't? But if people are going to elect him on his record and they care about education, they wouldn't be voting for him, because the schools in Stanford are some of the worst performing in the state under his leadership. So I think things that will be more important contributors, though, to our repairing our inner city schools is school choice, money following the child, performance pay for teachers, and performance-based promotion for teachers based on assessments of child school performance. Figuring out a way to get underperforming teachers either professionally retrained, and if that doesn't work, somehow retiring them from the system. We simply cannot afford to continue to fail to educate our children just to support teachers who aren't performing. I think the public mood is finally coming around to, hey, we like teachers. Teachers are an important part of the solution. We need excellent teachers, but kids come first. And the needs of our kids are readily apparent to people, particularly in our inner cities. So we need policies that promote the priorities of our children. And
I'm sorry, let me ask you about the money following the children. That means the child gets the opportunity to choose a school choice, private school, Catholic school?
No.
No.
No, public school choice.
All public school choice.
You're talking about vouchers, and that's
what I'm asking you. Are you getting into that?
No,
area?
I don't support vouchers.
Okay. The money going
charter schools, though, right?
Yeah, this would be charter schools, magnet schools, or if you're in a public school district that has an underperforming or failing public school, you have the choice of going out of district to a performing public school.
So, say in Norwich, one school
done in Hartford.
Right. Does that kind of leave the kids and make the schools worse, or the schools that are left behind, and eventually maybe those schools close or improve, but for the short term, of which 5 to 8 years is maybe the life of an education, you're going to lose some kids on that.
Yeah, that's an argument that people who are trying to maintain the status quo make, but I don't buy it. First of all, I think the grants for children should match their needs. So I don't think it should necessarily be a single amount. If a child has special needs, the grant should be more. And that way, if there's an imbalance that develops in a school where they have more kids with special needs, they're getting more money to address, because it does cost more to educate a child with special needs. So they should get more money. But if they're still not performing, they're not doing a good job for those kids with the additional money, something needs to be done. And I think people who are trying to preserve the status quo assume that if you have a failing school, it's going to sit there and fester, and there are going to be years and years of kids who are getting bad education. I don't tolerate the a public institution that's failing our young people. So this will be swift, and if a school is failing, it'll be kind of reconstituted immediately. So I don't see the kids who are left behind in those schools as suffering. We will figure out a way to deliver a good education to them.
And what's your basis for a good education? CMT scores, long-term, who gets into college? I mean, what would you base a good education? What do you call a good education?
Well, certainly test scores and other objective measures of performance. School dropout rates are important, and other subjective measures of performance, and they all need to be adjusted for obviously socioeconomic circumstances, other things that impact neighborhoods and kids' ability to perform, so that people aren't penalized for having a more challenging group to educate. But the argument that you shouldn't measure any of this stuff because you can't get an accurate measure. We can get a lot better information than what we have. So the idea that we shouldn't even start down this course of measuring performance and trying to match pay, promotions, and the funding for schools based on performance is simply wrong. We can do better, we must do better, and the way you start is by figuring out where the problem is and what you can do to solve it. And without measuring the extent of the problem and measuring people's performance, you can't even start down that path.
You mentioned people who want to keep the status quo. Is this opening a can of worms for all 160 school districts who have to deal with 160 unions, teacher unions to deal with that, on who stays and who goes and what the performance level is? It seems like there's a lot of questions and a lot of red tape and a lot of negotiation that would have to go on to implement that.
Well, first of all, I'm a problem solver, and the first thing a good problem solver does is don't go places where there aren't problems. Work on the problems, and if it isn't broken, don't fix it.
Yeah.
So the first thing you would say is, we're not going to get involved, meaning the state is not going to get involved if you're performing. So if you're a school district or you're a town or a city and your schools are performing well, keep doing what you're doing. We're not going to get involved. We're not going to mess around. And so we're just going to focus on the areas where schools are not performing. And I can promise you that those towns and cities will welcome support from the state. I mean, they're already getting funding, but there are a lot of other things that they aren't getting. And I think a lot of school boards and mayors and first selectmen and others, would like more support. They're not happy if you're not educating your young people in a city in Connecticut. You can't be too happy with the status quo.
Aren't you talking a little bit? It sounds a little bit like, so clarify it for me. But aren't we dancing a little close to the line of home rule, where education is, those policies and decisions, et cetera, are all made on the local level with the Board of Education. When it sounds like what you're talking about is setting a standard statewide and then mandating communities to meet that standard. If not, here comes the state.
Yes.
So,
as long as you're doing a good job, you can. The state's not going to get involved. But if Connecticut has a constitutional requirement to provide a good education to all its young people. So the state actually has a constitutional obligation. So we can't. No matter how much I'm always for home rule when it's working. When it's not working, I think the state needs to intervene. And a lot of boards of education, frankly, are not functioning very well. They're not getting the job done. And in many towns and cities, the chief executive, the mayor, first selectman, and the board of education are conflicted about what should be done with the schools. And lots of times the board of education controls the budget. And the mayor, first selectman, has very little control over the budget and none over policy. So I think and certainly in a lot of those instances, they would welcome the state coming in and helping out.
Back on the issue of taxes, the issue arose a couple of weeks ago, and from what I've read, that both you and your opponent, Dan Malloy, seem to consider it as an option, and that is the possibility of allowing municipalities additional sources of revenue than just property taxes, possibly, you know, the sales tax, possibly the hotel tax. That would require, to a certain degree, raising the sales tax so that there would be that little extra to get to the municipality, or the hotel tax, or reducing the amount of state aid that would go to that community so that you wouldn't have to raise the taxes to provide that extra. Where do you stand on it?
Yeah, well, I don't want to get misinterpreted here, because I'm not promoting or suggesting that the town should raise taxes. I think, again, families are under enough financial stress. But I don't think the state has a role. You're talking about home rule. I don't know why the state of Connecticut is telling towns and cities that they can only raise revenues through property tax. I think that ought to be how a town or a city generates its revenue should be up to them. So I don't believe that the state should be mandating on towns and cities what they're limiting their source of revenue to property tax. And let me give you a good example why. Because in a lot of towns, the property tax falls inequitably on certain people, and the property tax falls inequitably on seniors. And many seniors and families are adversely affected because a lot of seniors are on fixed income. So if you retire at age 65 on a fixed income, and most people have incomes that are just enough to get through, and you're living you own a home and you live in a home. Over 14 years, when Dan Malloy was in Stamford, property taxes went up 80%. He raised property taxes every year in Stamford that he was in office. So with seniors, what happens is the property taxes keep getting raised. You have a fixed income, and pretty soon you have to leave. You can't afford to stay in your house anymore. So a lot of seniors are driven from their homes because of the limitation on cities and towns to collecting revenues only from property taxes, and it certainly happened in Stamford under Dan Malloy. So I don't think that taxes should fall so inequitably on certain populations, and particularly seniors.
Well, let me play devil's advocate. If you somehow get the legislature or through the Constitution or whatever the case may be, get it so that municipalities can choose to apply different taxes other than just the property tax. Obviously, municipalities are going to take advantage of that. So there's a tax increase that's coming. You didn't do it, the state didn't do it, but you set up a vehicle where taxes would get increased. And if you were then to take a look at the state budget and say, okay, the towns are now have this additional source of revenue, we can see some savings here in the amount of money that the state gives the town and cut state spending. Isn't that contradictory to the pledge that you made of, I'm not going to hurt the community, the municipalities. I'm not going to raise taxes, but I'll create this little vehicle over here where they can raise the taxes, and I get to cut the budget.
No, I'm not saying that. I think any mayor or first selectman in a city right now who went out and said, "Oh, let's start a local sales tax or a local income tax or something else," would be out of office pretty quickly. So I think the same reason that voters don't want any more taxes at the state level, they're not going to. Any politician will be at his or her peril locally proposing any new taxes, unless they're saying, well, we're going to drop the property tax by 20% and we're going to put this tax on them. But any net new taxes in any community